Welcome back to Jungle Wars Stories. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button. It really helps us grow. Thank you. What I'm about to tell you happened in July of 2001. For 23 years, I've carried this secret alone. I signed documents that said if I ever spoke about what happened in Death Valley that summer, I would be charged with violations of the Espionage Act, stripped of my benefits, and imprisoned for the rest of my life. They said it was a matter of extreme national security. They said the information was classified at the highest level. They said that even thinking about it too hard could be considered a security breach. But I'm 68 years old now. I have lung cancer. Stage 4. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe less. My wife passed away 3 years ago. My kids are grown and distant. I have nothing left to lose and everything left to tell. My name is Master Sergeant Richard Thornton. In July of 2001, I was 45 years old, 27 years into my career with the United States Army. I had served in Panama in the First Gulf War in peacekeeping missions across 3 continents. I had seen combat, had lost friends, had done things that still wake me up at night. I thought I understood what war was. I thought I understood what fear was. I didn't understand anything. The mission was supposed to be simple. A search and rescue operation in Death Valley National Park. 8 soldiers from Fort Irwin had gone missing during a training exercise 5 days earlier. They had been conducting desert survival training in the Panamint Range, a remote section of the park where temperatures regularly exceeded 120 degrees in the summer. They had supplies for 3 days. They had GPS, satellite phones, emergency beacons. They were experienced soldiers who knew desert conditions. They vanished without a trace. No distress calls, no emergency beacon activations, no response to radio checks. After 48 hours, Fort Irwin launched a search operation. Helicopters, ground teams, dogs. They found the location where the soldiers had set up their last camp. They found equipment. They found supplies. They found everything except the soldiers. That's when they called us in. My team was part of a specialized unit that handled unusual situations. We didn't have an official designation. We didn't appear on any organizational charts. We were the people they sent when conventional search and rescue wasn't enough, when something didn't make sense, when the normal explanations didn't fit. There were 6 of us on the team. I was the team leader, the old man, the one who'd seen too much and stayed in too long. Staff Sergeant Alex Martinez was my second in command. He was 38 years old, from El Paso, 15 years in service. Alex was the best tracker I'd ever worked with. He could read terrain like other people read books. He could tell you how many people had passed through an area, how long ago, what they were carrying, where they were headed, whether they were injured, whether they were afraid. He had a gift for seeing patterns that other people missed. Details that didn't make sense individually, but painted a clear picture when you put them together. I'd served with Alex for 8 years by that point. We'd been in the First Gulf War together, had walked through minefields in Bosnia together, had trained in every desert from Arizona to Saudi Arabia together. He'd saved my life twice. I'd saved his once. That kind of bond, you can't break it. You can't replace it. Alex had grown up poor in El Paso, the son of migrant workers who'd come from Mexico looking for a better life. His father had worked construction, breaking his body 12 hours a day so his kids could go to school. His mother had cleaned houses, scrubbing other people's toilets so her children wouldn't have to. Alex joined the Army to escape that poverty, to give his parents something to be proud of, to prove that their sacrifice had been worth it. He had a wife named Carmen. They'd met in high school, got married when they were 19, stuck together through deployments and separations and all the stress that military life puts on a marriage. Carmen was a nurse at a hospital in El Paso. She worked night shifts, took care of their daughters during the day, somehow managed to keep everything together while Alex was overseas. She was stronger than any soldier I'd ever met. They had 2 daughters, Sophia was 16, smart as hell, wanted to be a veterinarian, spent all her free time volunteering at animal shelters. Isabella was 14, into theater, had just gotten the lead role in her school's production of Annie. Alex was so proud of them. He showed me pictures constantly. Sophia with a rescued dog, Isabella in costume on stage, the family together at Christmas, at birthdays, at every moment Alex had missed because of his service. He told me once that everything he did, every mission, every risk, was so his daughters could have a better life than he'd had growing up. He said they were going to college. They were going to have careers. They were going to have choices he'd never had. That was his mission. That was what kept him going. I try not to think about what I told Carmen when we got back. The lies I had to tell. The truth I couldn't share. I try not to think about Sophia and Isabella growing up without understanding why their father became so distant, so broken, so unable to talk about what happened. They deserved better. Alex deserved better. Sergeant First Class James Turner was our medic and scientist. He had a degree in biology from Penn State, had been pre-med before he decided to join the Army instead. He was 36 years old, from a small town in Pennsylvania, brilliant in a way that made some people uncomfortable. He was always asking questions, always trying to understand the how and why of everything. Why does this plant grow here? Why does this rock formation look like that? Why do weather patterns behave this way? Some people found him annoying. I found him invaluable. James saw things that the rest of us missed. Details. Anomalies. Things that didn't fit the expected pattern. He had a mind that never stopped working, never stopped analyzing, never accepted the obvious answer when there might be a deeper one underneath. He joined the Army because he couldn't afford medical school. His parents were farmers, good people, but poor. He'd gotten into Penn State on academic scholarships, worked 3 jobs to pay for what the scholarships didn't cover, graduated with a degree and $60,000 in debt. Medical school was another 4 years, another $250,000 he didn't have. So he joined the Army. They'd pay for medical school after his service was complete. That was the deal. He was supposed to get out in 2003. He was supposed to go to Johns Hopkins, become a surgeon, save lives. That was his plan. That was his dream. James had a partner, Michael, back in Virginia. They'd been together for 8 years. This was 2001, when the military was still under don't ask, don't tell. James never talked about Michael at work. He never mentioned him in conversations. He kept his personal life completely separate from his military life because that's what you had to do to survive. But I knew. And I didn't care. What mattered was that James was the best medic I'd ever worked with, and I trusted him with my life. Michael was an architect. He designed houses, buildings, spaces where people could live and work and be happy. James showed me drawings sometimes, sketches Michael had done for a house they were going to build together someday. A small place in the mountains, surrounded by trees, far away from noise and stress and military bases. That was their dream. That was what they were working toward. I wonder if Michael ever found out what really happened. I wonder if he spent years waiting for James to come home, wondering why the man who came back was so different from the man who'd left. I wonder if he's still alive, still designing beautiful spaces, still carrying the weight of a loss he was never allowed to properly grieve. Specialist Kevin Park was our communications expert. He was 29 years old, Korean American, grew up in Los Angeles in a neighborhood where he learned to fix electronics because buying new ones wasn't an option. He could make any radio work, any satellite connection function, any encryption code break. He had a gift for understanding how systems worked, how information moved, how to make technology do things it wasn't designed to do. He was a genius, but he'd never call himself that. Kevin was quiet, introverted, more comfortable with machines than with people. He said electronics made sense to him in a way that human beings never did. Electronics had rules. They followed logic. They didn't lie, didn't hide their true nature, didn't pretend to be something they weren't. You could understand them if you were willing to put in the work. He joined the Army to escape a difficult family situation. His father had been abusive. His mother had been too afraid to leave. Kevin enlisted the day after he turned 18, got out, never looked back. The Army gave him structure, purpose, a family that cared about him. It gave him the thing he'd never had growing up: stability. Kevin was engaged to a woman named Jennifer. They'd met at a church social in Los Angeles when he was home on leave. She was a kindergarten teacher, gentle and patient, the kind of person who saw the good in everyone. She saw the good in Kevin when he didn't see it in himself. She made him believe he was worthy of love, of happiness, of a future. They were supposed to get married that October. Kevin had the wedding invitation in his pack. He showed it to me the night before we deployed into the valley. The ceremony was going to be in a garden in Pasadena. Jennifer's parents were paying for everything, treating Kevin like the son they'd never had. Kevin was so excited. He kept talking about the honeymoon they were planning, 2 weeks in Japan, visiting his grandmother's village in Kyoto, the place his family came from, the place he'd never seen but always felt connected to. I went to the funeral. There was no body to bury. They put an empty casket in the ground while Jennifer sobbed in the front row, her wedding dress still hanging in her closet at home, her future destroyed by something she would never understand and could never be told about. Private First Class Anthony Russo was our youngest team member, though not by much. He was 24 years old, from Newark, New Jersey, 3 years in service. He was big, 6'3", built like a linebacker, with energy that made the rest of us feel old. He was always ready for action, always volunteering for the hard jobs, always pushing himself to do more, be better, prove himself worthy. He made everything feel possible, even when the situation looked hopeless. His enthusiasm was infectious. Russo had lost his mother to breast cancer when he was 16. His father, a construction worker named Tony, had raised 3 kids alone after that. Worked double shifts, sacrificed everything, made sure his children had food and clothes and opportunities. Russo talked about his father with reverence. He said Tony Russo was the toughest man he'd ever known, the strongest, the most dedicated. He said he'd joined the Army to make his father proud, to honor the sacrifice Tony had made. Russo sent money home every month to help his younger siblings with college. His brother, Frank, was studying civil engineering at Rutgers. His sister, Maria, wanted to be a high school English teacher. Russo was determined that they would both graduate debt-free. He worked extra duties, volunteered for hazardous pay assignments, saved every dollar he could so his siblings wouldn't have to struggle the way he had. He talked about them constantly. Frank's grades, Maria's boyfriend, their father's health. His family was everything to him. Everything he did for them. I think about Tony Russo sometimes. I think about him getting the news that his son was dead. Another funeral with an empty casket. Another family destroyed by lies. I wonder if Frank and Maria finished college. I wonder if they ever knew what their brother had really done for them, the real price he'd paid. And then there was Corporal Lisa Chen. She was 31 years old, from San Francisco, 9 years in service. No relation to William Chen from any other mission. Completely different person. Lisa was tough, smart, fearless in a way that came from having already faced the worst and survived it. She'd done 2 tours in Kosovo during the ethnic cleansing, had seen some of the worst humanity had to offer. Mass graves. Children killed for being the wrong ethnicity. Villages burned to the ground. She didn't talk much about what she'd seen there, but you could see it in her eyes sometimes. That distance, that weight, that knowledge that the world contained horrors most people couldn't imagine. Lisa was the only one on the team who wasn't married, engaged, or in a relationship. When people asked her about it, she'd say the Army was her family. She'd say she didn't need anything else. But I think that was a lie. I think she was lonely. I think she'd seen too much darkness and didn't know how to let anyone get close anymore. I think she was afraid that if she let someone in, if she let herself care, she'd lose them the same way she'd lost everything else she'd cared about. She was an excellent soldier. Disciplined, focused, reliable. She followed orders without question, but also thought independently when the situation required it. She was exactly the kind of person you wanted on your team when things went bad. I don't know if Lisa had any family. She never mentioned parents, siblings, anyone waiting for her back home. Maybe there was no one. Maybe that's why losing her was easier for the Army to sweep under the rug. No one to ask questions, no one to demand answers, just another soldier who disappeared into the classified darkness. We deployed into Death Valley on July 18, 2001. A Black Hawk dropped us at the last known position of the missing soldiers, a rocky canyon in the Panamint Range about 30 miles from any paved road. The temperature was already 115 degrees when we hit the ground at 0900 hours, and it was only going to get hotter. Death Valley is the hottest place on Earth. It holds the record for the highest reliably recorded temperature, 134 degrees Fahrenheit, measured in 1913. In the summer, ground temperatures can exceed 200 degrees. You can fry an egg on a rock. You can get third-degree burns from touching metal that's been sitting in the sun. The air is so dry it sucks the moisture out of your lungs with every breath. You can feel yourself dehydrating in real time, your body draining away faster than you can replace it. People die here every year. Hikers who underestimate the heat, tourists who run out of water, adventurers who think they're tough enough to handle it. The desert doesn't care how tough you are. It doesn't care how well prepared you think you are. It will kill you if you make even one small mistake. We weren't making any mistakes. We carried more water than we thought we'd need, wore clothing specifically designed for extreme heat, planned to move during the cooler parts of the day and rest during the peak heat. We had satellite phones, GPS, emergency beacons. We had everything we needed to survive. But survival wasn't the challenge. Not really. The helicopter kicked up massive clouds of dust and sand as it descended. The rotors created a windstorm that sandblasted our faces even through our protective gear. We jumped out with our packs, our weapons, our equipment. The pilot gave us a thumbs up and the Black Hawk lifted off, the sound of its engines fading as it climbed and disappeared over the mountains. And then, we were alone. The silence that followed was absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just the oppressive quiet of a landscape so hostile that almost nothing could survive there. The only sound was our own breathing, harsh and loud in our ears, and the crunch of our boots on the rocky ground. I looked around at my team. Martinez was already scanning the terrain, his eyes moving across the landscape, reading it. Turner was checking his medical equipment, making sure everything had survived the flight. Park was setting up the satellite radio, establishing our communications link with base. Russo was doing a perimeter check, his rifle ready, his eyes alert. Lisa was standing next to me, waiting for orders, her face already shiny with sweat despite the fact that we'd been on the ground less than 5 minutes. The canyon ahead of us looked like the surface of another planet. Barren, lifeless, ancient beyond comprehension. The rock formations were twisted and layered, showing billions of years of geological history, reds and oranges and browns, colors baked into the stone by unimaginable heat and pressure and time. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, but it was also wrong. Something about this place felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't just the heat or the emptiness. It was something else, something deeper, like the land itself was hostile to our presence. Martinez came over to me and pointed toward the canyon. He said the missing soldier's last known position was about 2 clicks in that direction. He said we should reach it in under an hour if we maintained a steady pace. I nodded and gave the order to move out. We moved in tactical formation, staying alert, weapons ready, eyes scanning constantly. Not because we expected enemy contact. We were in the middle of Death Valley National Park. The threat here wasn't human, but years of training had made the formation automatic. It was how we moved. It was who we were. The heat was overwhelming. Within 15 minutes, I could feel the sweat pouring down my back, soaking through my clothing. My mouth was dry despite drinking water constantly. The air shimmered above the rocks, creating mirages that looked like pools of water in the distance. I'd seen this before, many times, in deserts all over the world. But knowing it was a trick of the light didn't make it any less cruel. Turner was taking readings with a thermometer. He said the air temperature was 117 degrees. He said the ground temperature was probably closer to 170. He told us to be careful about what we touched, what we leaned against. Everything out here could burn us. We found the missing soldiers' camp within an hour, exactly where Martinez had predicted. It was in a narrow section of the canyon, a place where the walls provided some shade during part of the day. Smart location. Whoever had picked this spot knew what they were doing. The camp was still standing. 3 tents, military issue, properly staked and secured. Equipment was organized and stored correctly. A camp stove was set up with fuel canisters nearby. Water containers were stacked in the shade. Everything was exactly as it should be. Except there were no people. We approached carefully. Lisa and I covered while Martinez, Turner, and Park entered the camp. Russo kept watch on our back trail. Martinez walked the perimeter, his eyes on the ground, reading the story written in the sand and rocks. He knelt down, touched the dirt, lifted his head to check angles. He walked in circles, covering the same ground multiple times, seeing things that were invisible to the rest of us. Finally, he stood up and came back to me. He said 8 people had been here. He said they'd spent at least 2 nights, maybe 3. He said their last movements had been calm, organized, not panicked. They had packed up some of their gear, but not all of it. They had taken their weapons, their radios, their GPS units. They had left their tents, their food, their extra water. And then they had walked out of the camp, going deeper into the canyon. All 8 of them, together, in an organized line, walking with purpose toward something. What could make 8 experienced soldiers leave their water supply in Death Valley and walk deeper into the desert? Turner was examining the campsite more carefully. He was going through the abandoned gear, checking everything with his methodical, scientific approach. He found a journal in one of the tents. It belonged to Sergeant Kyle Morrison, one of the missing soldiers. Turner flipped through it, reading quickly, his eyes moving across the pages. His expression grew more concerned with each entry. He came over to me and handed me the journal, pointing to the last few entries. I read them standing there in that forsaken canyon, the heat pressing down on me, sweat dripping into my eyes. The entry from 3 days earlier talked about unusual rock formations they'd discovered deeper in the canyon, geometric patterns that didn't look natural, precise angles and measurements that seemed impossible in a natural formation. The entry said they couldn't stop thinking about it. It said the patterns looked intentional, designed, created by something intelligent. The next entry from 2 days earlier was shorter. It just said they'd been hearing sounds at night. Humming, like a voice but not a voice, coming from deeper in the canyon. It said nobody could sleep because the sound got into your head and stayed there. The final entry was from the day before they disappeared. It was barely legible, the handwriting rushed and shaky. It said, "We're going to investigate further today. We have to know. We have to understand. The humming won't stop. It's calling us. It wants us to see. This could be significant." That was it. That was the last thing Morrison had written. I looked up from the journal and met Turner's eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. We both understood what this meant. The soldiers hadn't gotten lost. They hadn't succumbed to heat exhaustion. They had found something, and that something had drawn them in, pulled them deeper, taken them. Park came over and told me the satellite radio was working, but he couldn't raise base. He was getting nothing but static. He said his equipment was fine. The signal just wasn't getting through, like something was blocking it. I made a decision. Standard procedure would have been to withdraw, report what we'd found, wait for additional resources. But 8 soldiers were missing. They'd been gone for 5 days. In this heat, if they were still alive, every hour mattered. We would follow their trail. We would find them or find out what happened to them. We would complete the mission. I told Park to keep trying to raise base. I told everyone to double-check their water supply and make sure they had enough. I told them that we were going deeper into the canyon and we needed to stay sharp, stay together, stay alert. Martinez took point. He followed the trail deeper into the canyon, deeper into the heat, deeper into whatever the missing soldiers had found. The terrain was brutal, rocky, steep, with loose scree that made every step treacherous. The temperature climbed as the day progressed. By noon, it was 125 degrees. The canyon walls radiated heat like an oven. We drank water constantly, poured it over our heads, soaked our clothing. It evaporated almost instantly. Martinez followed the trail. It was easy to track. 8 sets of boots, all moving in the same direction, all maintaining formation. No signs of struggle, no signs of confusion. They knew where they were going. After about 3 miles, the canyon narrowed. The walls pressed in on both sides, rising hundreds of feet above us. The sun was blocked out. The temperature dropped slightly, maybe down to 110. The relief was almost physical. That's when we saw the symbols. They were carved into the canyon walls. Geometric patterns, circles within squares within triangles, spirals that seemed to move when you looked at them directly. They covered both walls of the canyon, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stretching up toward the sky. Turner pulled out a camera and started documenting them. He said he'd never seen anything like this. The patterns weren't random. They were mathematical, precise. They meant something. Park tried to radio back to base. His equipment wasn't working. No signal. He checked everything. The radios were fine. There was just nothing. Like we'd stepped into a dead zone where electromagnetic radiation couldn't penetrate. We should have turned back then. That was the smart move. We were in an unmapped canyon with no communications and no support. We had found evidence that something strange was happening here. We should have withdrawn, regrouped, come back with more resources. But we didn't. Because we could hear something ahead of us. A sound. Low and rhythmic. Like humming. Like singing. Like voices calling from deep inside the earth. And we knew the missing soldiers had gone toward that sound. We kept moving forward. The canyon opened into a chamber. Natural, carved by water over millions of years, but also not natural. The walls were too smooth. The geometry was too perfect. This was a space that had been modified, shaped, turned into something intentional. And in the center of the chamber was a structure. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. Not in 27 years of military service. Not in all my travels around the world. Not in any book or photograph or documentation. It was completely unlike anything human civilization had ever created. The structure looked like it was made of stone, but the stone was wrong. It was too dark, almost black, with a surface that was too smooth, too perfect. When light hit it, the light didn't reflect normally. It seemed to be absorbed, pulled into the stone, consumed by it. And the stone itself seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at it, like it existed slightly out of phase with normal reality. It was shaped like a pyramid, but inverted, with the point going down into the ground instead of up into the air. The base was about 30 feet across, maybe more. The point disappeared into a hole in the canyon floor that looked like it had been drilled by something impossibly powerful and precise. The symbols we'd seen on the canyon walls were carved into every surface of the structure, thousands of them, covering it completely. And they were glowing. A faint blue-green light, pulsing slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. But there was no power source. No cables, no generators, no batteries. The light was coming from the stone itself, or from something inside the stone, or from something we couldn't understand and couldn't detect with any of our equipment. Martinez approached it carefully, his rifle raised, his finger on the trigger, his eyes scanning for any threat. He walked around it slowly, studying it from every angle. He reached out like he was going to touch it, then pulled his hand back. He looked at me and shook his head. He said it was old, ancient, maybe thousands of years old, maybe millions, but it also looked like it had been placed here yesterday. There was no weathering, no erosion, no signs of age, no accumulation of dust or sand despite being in one of the harshest environments on Earth. He said it shouldn't exist. He said nothing like this should exist. Turner was already pulling out his equipment, his hands shaking with excitement or fear or both. He was taking measurements, documenting everything, his scientific mind trying to make sense of the impossible. He measured the dimensions. He measured the angles. He measured the temperature of the stone, the light intensity, the electromagnetic radiation. He turned to me, his face pale, and said the mathematics of the structure violated everything he understood about architecture and engineering. The angles were too precise, the proportions were too perfect, and the stone itself was registering temperatures that didn't make sense. It should be hot, sitting in this canyon, absorbing sunlight. But it was cool, 65 degrees, like it was air-conditioned, like something was actively regulating its temperature. And the electromagnetic readings were off the charts. The structure was emitting radiation across the entire spectrum. Radio waves, microwaves, infrared, visible light, ultraviolet, X-rays, everything, all at once, but somehow focused, controlled, directed. Not random, not natural, intentional. Park was frantically trying to get his equipment to work. Still nothing. No radio, no GPS, no satellite connection. His equipment was functioning perfectly. The signals just weren't getting through. Like we'd stepped into a dead zone, a bubble where normal physics didn't apply, where the rules of reality were different. He said we needed to get out of here. He said we needed to leave now and call in people who understood this kind of thing. Scientists, specialists, people with better equipment and more knowledge. But we couldn't leave, not without the missing soldiers. Russo found something at the base of the structure. He called me over, his voice tight. I walked over and looked down. Dog tags. 8 sets of dog tags, arranged in a perfect circle around the base of the structure, spaced exactly evenly, placed with deliberate precision. Like an offering, like a sacrifice, like a message. I picked them up one by one, reading the names. Sergeant Kyle Morrison, Specialist James Whitaker, Specialist Daniel Cruz, Corporal Amanda Foster, Corporal Brian Walsh, Private First Class Timothy Reed, Private First Class Marcus Johnson, Private First Class Sarah Mitchell. All 8 missing soldiers. Lisa asked the question we were all thinking. If their dog tags were here, where were they? That's when we heard the humming again. Louder now than before. Not distant, not far away. Right here. All around us. Coming from the structure, or from below it, or from the air itself. It was impossible to tell. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, to exist on multiple frequencies at once, to bypass our ears and vibrate directly in our bones. And then the structure started to open. I don't know how to describe it. The stone moved, but stone doesn't move. Sections of it slid apart like they were liquid, like they were made of mercury or oil, revealing a passage going down into darkness. The blue-green light intensified, became almost blinding, pulsed faster. The humming grew louder, became more complex, developed harmonies and counter-melodies, became something that sounded almost like language, but wasn't any language anyone on Earth had ever spoken. Martinez was shouting for us to fall back. His training was kicking in. Unidentified threat. Possible hostile contact. Standard protocol was to withdraw to a safe distance and call for support. We started moving back toward the canyon entrance, but the ground beneath us was shaking. Not violently, not like an earthquake, just a steady vibration, like we were standing on top of a massive machine that was powering up after being dormant for a very long time. And the chamber was changing. The walls were moving. The ceiling was lowering. The passage we'd come through was narrowing. It was like the entire space was alive, conscious, responding to our presence. And then something started coming up from below. I saw them emerge from the darkness of the passage. 8 figures, human-shaped, moving in perfect synchronization, walking in a line, one behind the other. The 8 missing soldiers. They walked up the passage and into the chamber. Their movements were smooth, fluid, identical, like they were puppets being controlled by the same puppeteer. Their eyes were open but unseeing. Their faces were blank, emotionless, empty. They were walking, but they weren't there. Not really. Whatever made them human, whatever made them individuals, whatever spark of consciousness and personality and self had animated them, was gone. They walked past us without acknowledging our presence. Martinez called out to them, shouted their names, tried to get their attention. They didn't react. They didn't even turn their heads. They just kept walking, kept moving in that perfect synchronized line, like soldiers on a parade ground, but worse, because parade ground soldiers are still human, still aware, still themselves. They walked to the structure. They arranged themselves around it in a perfect circle, each one standing exactly where their dog tags had been placed. They stood perfectly still, perfectly straight, their arms at their sides, their faces pointed toward the sky. And then they started to sink into the ground, not falling, not collapsing, sinking, like the earth was liquid, and they were being pulled down into it, slowly, steadily, inevitably. First their feet disappeared, then their ankles, then their calves. The ground accepted them like water accepts rain, swallowing them without resistance, without effort, without leaving any trace that they had ever been there. Turner ran toward them. He was screaming, trying to grab one of them, trying to pull him back, trying to do something. He reached Morrison, who was closest. He grabbed Morrison's arm, tried to haul him up, tried to stop him from sinking. But his hands passed through Morrison like he was made of smoke, like he wasn't solid, like he wasn't really there at all, just an image, a projection, a ghost. Turner fell backward, scrambling away, his eyes wide with horror. He was a scientist. He understood the world through logic and reason and observable phenomena, and what he'd just witnessed violated all of that. It broke the rules. It made reality itself unreliable. I was shouting orders, trying to get everyone organized, trying to maintain some semblance of control, but the words felt meaningless. How do you give orders in a situation that doesn't make sense? How do you follow protocol when protocol doesn't account for the impossible? The soldiers continued sinking. Their waists disappeared, their chests, their shoulders, their necks. One by one they slipped below the surface of the ground, the earth closing over them like water, leaving no hole, no depression, no sign that they had ever been there. The last thing I saw was Morrison's face. Blank, empty, peaceful in a terrible way. Then he was gone. They were all gone, pulled into the earth by something we couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't understand. And we were alone in that chamber with the structure that shouldn't exist, the light that had no source, the humming that seemed to come from the foundation of the world itself. I gave the order to retreat. We ran. We spent an hour searching. We tried to find the entrance again. We mapped the canyon. We checked GPS coordinates. Nothing matched. It was like the entire experience had been erased. Park's radio started working again. We called for extraction. A helicopter picked us up 2 hours later. The debrief lasted 6 weeks. They kept us in separate facilities, asked us the same questions over and over, made us draw diagrams, write reports, undergo psychological evaluations. They brought in specialists, scientists, military intelligence, people from agencies that don't have names. Then they told us what had happened. Training accident. The 8 soldiers had gotten disoriented in the heat, wandered into a dangerous area, and fallen into an unmapped sinkhole. Bodies unrecoverable. Tragic loss. That was the official story. They made us sign the documents. They made us swear we would never speak about what we'd really seen. They threatened us with prison, with ruin, with the destruction of everyone we loved. We signed. They separated us immediately. Martinez was transferred to Germany. Turner was sent to Alaska. Park went to Hawaii. Russo and Lisa were both reassigned to different bases, different units. I never saw any of them again. I tried to contact them over the years. Letters came back undeliverable. Phone numbers were disconnected. It was like they had all vanished, just like the 8 soldiers we'd been sent to find. Or maybe they didn't vanish. Maybe they just learned to be silent. Maybe they're out there somewhere, carrying the same weight I've carried, living with the same nightmares. I retired in 2005. I tried to build a normal life. I married a woman named Patricia. We had 2 children, Michael and Sarah. I tried to be a good husband, a good father. But how do you be good when you're hollow inside? How do you love people when part of you is still in that canyon, still watching those soldiers sink into the earth? Patricia knew something was wrong. She asked me about it for years. What happened? What are you not telling me? Why do you wake up screaming? Why do you avoid the desert? Why do you flinch when you hear humming? I couldn't tell her. The documents I'd signed, the threats they'd made. I couldn't put her in danger. I couldn't drag her into this darkness. So I lied. I said it was normal PTSD, combat stress, nothing specific, just the general weight of 27 years in the military. She tried to help. She suggested therapy, medication, support groups. I went through the motions. I took the pills. I talked to the therapists about made-up traumas, fictional missions, sanitized versions of my service. None of it helped. Because the real trauma, the thing that actually broke me, was locked away behind classifications and threats. Patricia died in 2021. Cancer. I sat by her bedside for 3 months watching her fade away. In those final days, when she was too weak to speak, I wanted to tell her. I wanted to give her the truth. I wanted her to understand why I'd been distant, why I'd been broken, why I'd never fully been able to be the husband she deserved. But I didn't. Even at the end, I kept the secret. Michael is 42 now. He's a teacher in Oregon. He has his own family. He calls me on holidays. Our conversations are polite but distant. He doesn't really know me. How could he? I've spent his entire life hiding the most important parts of myself. Sarah is 38. She's a lawyer in New York. She stopped calling years ago. She said I was never really there for her growing up. She said I was physically present, but emotionally absent. She was right. I failed them both. I failed Patricia. I failed everyone I ever loved because I couldn't tell them the truth about what I'd seen. But I can tell it now, because I'm dying, Because the cancer is in my lungs and my liver and my bones, and there's nothing they can do. Because I have nothing left to lose. In July of 2001, 8 American soldiers discovered something in Death Valley. Something ancient. Something impossible. Something that shouldn't exist. And then they were taken. Not killed. Taken. Absorbed. Pulled into something that we don't understand and can't fight. The structure is still there. I know it is. The government knows it is. They sealed that entire section of the Panamint Range. No hiking, no camping, no access. They say it's to protect endangered species. That's a lie. They sealed it because something is down there. Something that can take people. Something that's been taking people for who knows how long. How many missing hikers were never found in Death Valley? How many disappearances were explained away as heat exhaustion, dehydration, getting lost? How many of them walked into that canyon, saw those symbols, heard that humming, and never came back? I don't know, but I think it's more than we want to believe. The 8 soldiers' names were Sergeant Kyle Morrison, Specialist James Whitaker, Specialist Daniel Cruz, Corporal Amanda Foster, Corporal Brian Walsh, Private First Class Timothy Reed, Private First Class Marcus Johnson, and Private First Class Sarah Mitchell. They were people. They had families. They had futures. They deserved to come home. They deserved better than a lie about a sinkhole. My name is Master Sergeant Richard Thornton. I'm 68 years old. I have lung cancer and 6 months to live. I've spent 23 years keeping a secret that's eaten me alive. But I'm not keeping it anymore. If you're in the military, if you're doing training exercises in remote areas, be careful. Be aware. If you find symbols you don't recognize, if you hear sounds that shouldn't exist, if you feel like something is calling to you, turn around. Leave. Don't investigate. Don't try to understand. Because some things in this world aren't meant to be understood. Some things are older than us, stranger than us, more powerful than us. And some things, once they have you, never let go. Thanks for watching Jungle War Stories. If this story affected you, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever been to Death Valley, if you've ever hiked in those remote canyons, if you've ever seen something you couldn't explain, tell me about it. Because I don't think I'm the only one who's seen things out there. I think there are others. I think there are people who know. And maybe, if enough of us speak up, the truth will finally come out.